we have a pleasure of being joined by the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, Ms. Busi Mavuso, and then the President of Black Management Forum, Mr. Andile Nomla. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to run this session under the theme as it has already been shared amongst various social networks, preparing for transformed rural economy post-COVID-19. Firstly, before we go into that, I would like to just give order as to how are we going to run our session this evening. Firstly, we are going to have a Q&A session where our audience are able to ask questions, and then they will be filtered through to me, and then I'll be able to forward your question to our guest this evening. And then also let me request that you follow us on various digital social platforms, which includes Twitter, Facebook, and then the Instagram, and then the YouTube channel, and then our account name handlers or names are BMF Northwest across Twitter, Facebook, as well as and those two. And then also to follow the BMF channel, YouTube channel as Black Management Forum, so that you are able to access these sessions even at a later stage, or also to share it with your colleagues. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'll now move on to introduce our topic, and then just to lay the context as to why are we having this conversation today. As I've already alluded, the theme for this session is preparing for a transformed rural economy post-COVID-19. The country finds itself, or the world found itself in an unprecedented situation where we are, the World Health Organization have declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. Therefore, economy, global, even domestically, it has been disrupted, where we find ourselves having to spend more than 4 weeks or so, if I'm correct, where the economy has been operating at a very slow pace, where most of our institutions are not operational. We found even ourselves sitting at our respective homes this evening, having to join this session. So the BMF in Northwest, it has organized this seminar to say, let's have a discussion as members of Black Management Forum to discuss as to see how do we position ourselves as an organization that exists nationally, but we will find ourselves that our province is mainly rural, and then most of the challenges, the socio-economic challenges that we focus on as an organization are that of our rural economy. So therefore, as a point to our discussion, we are going to focus mainly on education, the impact that the COVID-19 has had on an education, and then unemployment. We have a lot of youth, among others, the graduates who are seated in various communities that have not been able to enter the employment sector prior to this COVID-19. Even after they are going to have a lot of challenges. And then the question was raised, so how do we play our role as professionals or as leaders of various organizations in accommodating this unemployed youth? So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, I will now move on to introduce our speaker, our first speaker, who will share her thoughts for about 15 minutes or so. And then subsequently move on to the second speaker, who will also have 15 minutes to share his thoughts as well. And then also let me highlight to you that I'm not alone on this session. I have the team, the provincial executive members that are working also to assist in filtering the questions, as Mrs. Bati, who is also going to be reflecting there to take your questions and forward them to me. So I will now introduce Ms. Busi Mavuso, and then I will just go through her profile briefly. Ms. Busi Mavuso is a chartered certified accountant, qualified with the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants UK. She also served as the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. Among her roles, directorship roles includes one, being non-executive director currently on the board of ESCOM board. And then also she serves as a non-executive director on Business Utility South Africa, BASA. And then also on a PEC investee company as a resultant finance. On her academical background, Ms. Busi has the following qualifications. She holds a Master's of Business Leadership from UNISA Graduate Business School of Leadership. And then secondly, she holds postgraduate qualification in diploma in management from the Gibbs Institute. I'll now request our speaker to come forth and then share her thoughts on the topic as we have requested, and then the questions will be done at a later stage, not during the entire session. After the second speaker have given his address, then we will allow our audience to ask questions, but you are encouraged to type your questions as we are currently reading them and then grouping them for that session. Thank you. And over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I am audible enough, Mr. MC. Thank you very much for the invitation to the Black Management Organization or Black Management Forum. President Nomlala, thank you very much for deeming it fit for me to come and share the stage with you this evening as we try and decipher this very important topic around COVID-19 and what the implications of it are going to be in South Africa. I think as much as this is very unprecedented, as the facilitator has just said, but I think one thing that we know for sure as a country and definitely as the world is that things as we know them and life as we know it is never going to be the same again. So I like how critical this topic is, you know, preparing for a transformed rural economy post-COVID-19. It's interesting for me in particular because a lot of conversations that have been involved in around the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, are focusing on the role of business, the role of, or where the economy is going to be, what are some of the interventions that we have to put in place as a country to be able to deal with this pandemic. But I don't know if we are actually looking at what matters. I don't know if we are looking at how this is actually going to impact the majority of the citizens of this country. And I think it was precisely my interest, you know, to agree to have this conversation tonight, because I thought that it would really be unfortunate if we were to continue having these discussions without illuminating what is critically important, at least in my mind. So I've also been asked to try and delve on the impact of education as well as on the effects of the unemployed population. So maybe let me start by sharing that I think around March sometime when this entire thing started, it might have been February, I don't remember, I was actually requested to contribute a chapter to a book titled Managing Organizations During the COVID-19 Vortex. And I was requested to talk about the role of business during this critical time. And deliberately, I went back to the authors of the book and the organization that invited me, and I said that if I'm going to be contributing to this, because I looked at a lot of the other contributing editors, and I saw that a lot of them are actually going to be talking about business. So we're all going to be having the same conversation. So I deliberately requested that, can I contribute a chapter that is titled The Coronavirus in a Fractured Democracy? Because from where I was sitting, I thought that that was what was important for us to illuminate. And some of my reflections were that it's important that we illuminate just how much this pandemic is going to expose just how fractured and unequal our society is. It's important that we illuminate just how much the lockdown, as necessary as it was, is actually going to impact severely the majority of the citizens of this country, which are mainly Black African. And it's important to illuminate that, because I think, let's remember that a lot of our Black Africans are still struggling with the basic needs in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, they are still struggling with your basic needs, and they are still struggling with, you know, the security needs. They are not even at the self-actualization where most of us, or where a few of us, are actually at. And this was an important issue for me, because when you look at just across the M1 bridge, which is the juxtaposition of Sandton and Alexander, the headache that the Sandtoners are sitting with during this lockdown, where the fact that they are not going to be able to walk their dogs, and the fact that they are not going to be able to go for their morning jogs, while the majority of the citizens of this country were still worried about, if the economy is locked down, we make our living on a day-to-day basis, so we don't even have the money to go and queue at Macro for the bulk buying that we saw happening before the lockdown happened. So if there aren't any people on the streets to actually support their livelihoods on a day-to-day basis, it therefore becomes very critical and very fundamental. It was interesting as well. I'm sure a lot of you saw this WhatsApp message that did the rounds, and it was posted by this Indian doctor. And he was talking about this, I think, in the context of India. But when I looked at it, I just thought how relevant it is to the South African context as well. And he was talking about just how much the ways in which to ward off the coronavirus are unfortunately only accessible to the affluent. He spoke about how we are being told that we actually need to observe social distancing. And yet social distancing assumes that you have a privilege of a house big enough to can actually be able to effect social distancing. Because let's agree that a lot of the citizens of this country are literally living on top of each other. So this phenomenon of social distancing, therefore, you know, is something that even if they want it, they are not going to be in they are not going to be in the position to actually effect. We are being told to constantly wash our hands. And the notion of washing your hands constantly assumes that you have running water. And I think let's agree that a lot of our people still don't have running water, especially in the rural economies. We are being told that we need to sanitize our hands frequently. That assumes that you have the money to buy the sanitizer in the first place. And that is an incorrect assumption for most of the Black Africans living in this country. We are told to stay at home so that we can ensure that we flatten the curve. And maybe let's agree that staying at home is a luxury that a lot of us actually cannot afford. So many of our people actually could not have observed what we were requested to do, you know, during this lockdown, and what we are continuously requested to do as we actually move on, you know, trying to ensure that the curve is actually flattened. So this coronavirus and this pandemic, for me, illuminates just how fundamentally flawed the structure of our society is, where only 19% can only afford medical aid, or where only 19% of us have the luxury of affording medical aid, and 48 million South Africans don't have access to private, or rather to medical aid, and therefore private healthcare, and they therefore have to be subjected to the collapsing public health infrastructure. It is concerning because Dr. Zolin Kiza told us that 70% of us are actually going to contract the virus before this thing finishes. And if you look at 70% of 59 million South Africans, that is a number way above 40 million people. And I think if we thought that what is happening in Italy was bad, maybe let's agree that what's going to happen in South Africa is actually going to be worse, you know, if we don't find ways to deal with this thing. I'm worried about those numbers that are actually being projected, because it means that a lot of breadwinners in this country, when all of this is said and done, they are actually going to be bedridden, which is therefore going to deepen the poverty that we currently have in this country. We are sitting with unemployment that is at 30% in terms of the narrow definition. And the economic modeling that has been done tells us that unemployment is actually going to skyrocket to more than 50%. We therefore have to look at it and say, what are some of the interventions that we're actually going to have to put in place to ensure that we actually don't get to that number? Because I think let's all agree that if we get to that, then we can't be sitting in a situation where you have too many people that are unemployed. And I'm worried that if all of those people were to decide to get angry all at once, then unfortunately we are going to be sitting in a situation that we're not going to be able to handle in this country. And I think this just reminds me of a conversation that I recently held with Ignatius Sihule, who is the CEO of KPMG, where we were talking about these matters, and he was actually saying that, you know, I'm worried that we have way too many people who have nothing to lose in this country. And he made an interesting example. He said, I'm reminded of when that was me in this country at some point, many years ago, when I was a youngster. He said we would go out as young people against the SAPS and against the South African Defence Force, who were carrying R1 rifles. We would go against them carrying sticks and stones. We knew that three things would happen. We knew that you would either die, you would either be shot and paralyzed, or you would actually either be critically injured. But because we had nothing to lose, we went out and fought against that system anyway. So we are unfortunately faced with that same situation again in this country, where you are sitting with way too many people who have nothing to lose. You see, I worry about this because this breeds social unrest. It fuels anger amongst people. And I'm worried that if you're sitting with such domestic instability, then unfortunately it affects the economic stability. We are never going to be able in this country to have a stable economy if you have such domestic instability. And then maybe if I were to move to the issue on education, Kofi Annan says that there is no tool for development more effective than education. And I agree with that. And I think I worry that in this country, we have done very little to change the structural inequities. And we find a lot of our people who are still subjected to Bantu education. In terms of where we are sitting today, a lot of your and my kids have the luxury of being homeschooled or of actually being able to access online education. And while the Minister of Basic Education is trying to think about how do we actually lift the lockdown on the schooling system, we are faced with the reality that a lot of our people are faced with the fact that in their classroom, these kids have 70, 80 people in one classroom. Now, if these kids have to go back to school and still be able to observe social distancing. How do you observe social distancing when there's 80 of you in a classroom? So I think we have made a fundamental mistake in this country to say that we have not, or we have done very little to change the structural inequities in as far as education is concerned. We're still sitting in a country where our grade 4 learners can read for meaning. And yet, if you look across the world to the Asian tigers, you will know that their grade 5 learners are being taught programming and coding. And we are sitting in a country which is an open economy, meaning that we are not only competing with only ourselves, but we are therefore competing with the rest of the world. And if you're sitting with such fundamental differences in the education system of our kids, then maybe let's agree that our kids in this country have lost the race before they've even begun running. And I think the pandemic just makes that bad situation worse. We therefore need to be asking the question of what are some of those interventions that we need to put in place to start dealing with these inequities once and for all. We are sitting in a country where we are told that only 10% of the youth that are entering the labor market have got some form of higher education or the other. 56% of the youth that are entering the labor market don't have matric. And we sit and wonder why we are sitting with 58% youth unemployment. So if this pandemic has not illuminated the importance of addressing the inequalities that we have in this country, I don't know what will. And I think as I close, Mr. MC, I've only been requested to speak for 15 minutes. For me, this pandemic illuminates just how important this notion of socio-economic justice is. Because if we would have been deliberate about fundamentally changing the structure of our economy, we're currently sitting with an economy that is a pyramid structure, where we have 10% of the people that are affluent, 40% that are actually sitting in the middle class, and 50% that are actually subjected to abject poverty. You therefore look at it and say, how are we going to soften the blow of the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure that the 50% of our people are cushioned, from the deep difficulties that they're actually still going to face when we emerge from this pandemic? I think maybe, just maybe, we have forgotten that what we achieved in this country in 1994 was democracy. It was not justice, neither was it inequality. And I think we have made the fundamental mistake of thinking that what we achieved in 1994 was actually justice or equality. It is not. We are yet to actually ensure that socio-economic justice is actually ushered in. Because I think our democracy is premised on that fundamental, to say that we are yet to bring the chapter 2 of this democracy, which is actually going to be socio-economic justice. I think this illuminates the fundamental failures of our government and of business. And it is a failure of government in my mind because this government embarked on the state capture project, which hollowed out our SOEs, who are now sitting as an albatross around our necks as South Africans. And thanks to them, we have now been downgraded to a sub-investment grade country, or to a junk status in another way. So the rest of the world are going to be talking about how do we deal with the COVID-19 crisis. We are actually hit with a double blow of the COVID-19 crisis and that of being a junk status country. What are therefore the interventions that we need to put in place to ensure that we deal with this business in this country has failed, in that they've still failed to effect transformation? It can't be right that 25 years into democracy, the CE report that comes out year after year says that only 14% of the executives in the private sector are Black Africans, and 70% are actually whites. But then you see the reason why government or why business is running amok in this country, it's because our government is failing to effect the policies that they were actually supposed to effect. So you therefore find businesses found gaps in the system, and they've thoroughly manipulated those gaps, and they've ensured that they don't do what we require to be done in this country to be able to solve for what we need to solve for. So we're clearly not very sure what the problem statement was when we ushered this democracy in 1994. Because if we were clear about what the problem statement was, then we wouldn't be sitting where we're sitting 25 years later. You know, the National Party government in 1948, when they took over from the English, they were very clear that what they were trying to solve for was the poor Afrikaner problem. And when they lost power in 1994, they actually, very adequately dealt with that. Unfortunately for us, we are sitting in a country where we have just overtaken Brazil as the most unequal society in the world, where a lot of our people are actually saying maybe, just maybe, things were better under the apartheid government. So I'm hoping that this pandemic allows us to maybe adjust the lens through which we are looking at things. I'm hoping that it allows us to probably re-evaluate the problem statement, to say what are the critical things that we need to be solving for, post-COVID-19, and what are some of those things that are actually going to ensure that we usher a better life for all, that we finally usher this notion of justice and equality that we have failed to usher for the past 25 years. Mr. MC, maybe let me pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Busi. Yes, we are now going to move on to the president of Black Management Forum. But just before we go on to the president, as I have indicated earlier on, that the questions may come through as we are currently evaluating them and grouping them, so that because we have a limited time, we'll be able to do so. And then I will reflect on Ms. Mavuso's presentation after the presentation of the president. Allow me, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce the president and quickly go through his bio. And then it reads as follows. Mr. Andile Nomlala is the current president of Black Management Forum and also serves as the chairperson of the board. Secondly to that, among his other directorship responsibility includes, among others, being the non-executive director of Black Management Forum Investment. And then also he occupies the executive director and a chief investment officer of a strategic partner group. And then also he's an entrepreneur, and then the founder of the NSC investment. And on quickly to jump into his academic background, Mr. Nomlala holds an executive MBA, Masters of Business Administration, and a postgraduate diploma in management practice from University of Cape Town Graduate School of Business. So that is a brief profile of President, and then I'll hand it over to you, Mr. President, so that you can reflect on the subject. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. MC. I don't know if I'm properly visible, but I hope so. Yes. Good evening, MD.
President, good evening. How are you? I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, thanks for taking time on your busy schedule to come and have a conversation with us in the BMF. And hey, I'm still new to these webinar things. I didn't get the memo of getting a suit whilst I'm sitting at home. So I just grabbed the next near t-shirt and I I got into the discussion. But MD, I'm quite encouraged with your last part of your input, where I want to pick it, my discussion from, is the issue of our economy. We are called, me and you, to come and discuss the preparing for a transformed rural economy post-COVID, and then the entangled education and other things into that. I sat when I was preparing for this discussion, and I was thinking, what is the basic, simple definition of an economy? And if you talk about rural economy, an economy is first a careful arrangement. It's a carefully arrangement of limited resources that usually is spearheaded by the state. You manage the resources for the benefit of the inhabitants of that economy, and to utilize them in the best way possible to actually end the so-called inequality talking about. Two is that what then becomes a rural interest. There is limited economy there, in the sense that the circulation of the rand that takes place in the rural areas is literally fueled by the social grant system in the main, and the remittances that we send to the villagers, those of us that comes and are migrant laborers in the cities. Now, if you want to rearrange and manage the resources for the rural dwellers to have a per capita income that is acceptable, to have the resources that are comparable to some of us that have in Sentin and Cape Town and the other places, what then do you do? Look, I am encouraged, Busi. I'll start by saying that I'm very encouraged for the first time in South Africa, where I see a government that seems to at least look like has a handle has a control of what is happening in our country for the first time. Whether it's influenced by COVID, but you could see that the government has decided to lock down the economy. The government has now been dictating what needs to happen going forward. And I want to associate myself with the dream or the vision that the president announced the other day of us building a new economy. And that new economy would have a huge, or an integral part, would have to incorporate the rural dwellers and the economic activities that takes place there. In South Africa, we know that the dominant economic stimulus or economic activities that takes place in the rural areas are mainly the agriculture, which is subsistence farming, and to some extent there's some level of tourism, because most of the beautiful holiday and tourist attractions in our country are mainly in the remote rural areas. In the past, during the Bantustan era, we used to have an industrial or a manufacturing sector in those rural economies, which had since died its slow death. Now, when you want to organize the rural economy, what do you do? Because I want to dwell more on the picture that we should have to the future. Our circumstances, Busi, have outlined them quite well. We are the most unequal society in the world. We have the most impoverished people, whilst we have the wealthiest people in the same country. If you go to a place called Kayamnandi in Stellenbosch, there is 1 million per capita across the streets. In fact, that inequality is even the highest, which is one of the most contributors into the widening Gini coefficient that we have. Because you have the Kayamnandi, this side, that has people that live less than $2 a day. On the other side, you have the biggest concentration of South Africa's capital, investment capital. Because you have the big houses, Ramgro, PSG, HCI, all of them are concentrated in Stellenbosch. You have individuals, the concentration of billionaires in our country are starting in the Atlantic seaboard of Cape Town, which is the Jewish community, are followed by the Atlantic seaboard, and they are followed by the Stellenbosch, which is the Afrikaner community. And there's old money that is also being seen with the British or English community in our country. So we are quite dispersed in terms of our own economic participation. Now, let's fast forward to COVID-19. The exposure that COVID-19 gave us is that we have since realized that we are in the worst ever case scenario in terms of the inequality state, the governance state, and thirdly, our own disparities, which is the economic inequality that we have. If you want, because I want my topic, I want to overemphasize it towards building the new economy. If you want to then use the reset button that COVID has forced us to use, then you want to build a new economy based on the new structural composition, you are creating a new foundation. The rural economy becomes your critical source or your critical point of your foundation. Two things. We have the land bank, colleagues, which is now almost has defaulted to about a credit of about 50 billion. Land bank, which is the bank that funds or that mainly invests in agricultural economy, needs to be saved. Once it's saved, it needs to have a developmental mandate. Currently, Land Bank has about 45 billion rands worth of loan book, which is the money that it has deployed. It has used the top and the big white Afrikaner to invest in the farming economy, that because they couldn't distribute the money themselves for whatever reason. 90% of Land Bank's loan book is literally controlled by those agricultural co-ops that I'm talking about. And we know that they have heavily invested because farming is a very highly technical business that is highly capital intensive. So the white community had used the state bank for many years. By the way, Land Bank, we inherited it from the apartheid. So, but during the democratic period, we have managed to just reduce Land Bank to be a wholesaler or a conduit where it goes and generates money in the capital markets on behalf of these white co-ops. Now, these defaults that they are experiencing at the time when the whole loan book, significant portion of it, is sitting with these white companies who are receiving payments. So you have, let me give you a picture. You have a loan book of 45 billion rands, but you can only remit about 1.5 billion rands of it a year from that loan book. Now, if you were to do the calculations, you would assume that the loans were given at least at 3%, 1.5% interest. But we know that's not true. The loans are actually heavy for those that have applied for them, and they are not going to black people. So if you're gonna leave then bank on outside of the equation of doing rural development, then you're not gonna achieve anything. The second thing is, in the rural communities, I want to envision this thing because I come from a rural town myself. In the rural communities, there is vast tracts of land with, more often than not, rivers cutting across the many fields that we used to have in Zim, that we used to have in Makai. There's rivers everywhere there, and tributaries, small, little, but there's water, sufficient water for food production. And in the past, during the well-managed and organized economy of the Bantustan, we used to have top producing primary agricultural products that were coming out of there. We had magua, we had nocha, we had milk, and all of those things in the Transkei area in particular. By the way, the belt, the Wild Belt, is one of the pieces of land you can, as compared to Mpumalanga and KZN, they have the most suitable soil for agricultural production. And by the way, we don't have vast tracts of land of agricultural production in our country. By the way, we do have agriculture, but agriculture might not necessarily be our competitive advantage. But we have to maximize the limited usage of the land that we have. Now, we have those tracts of land. We have top distributing platforms called the retailers, who are procuring. Woolworths alone procures almost north of 35 billion rand of food and clothing products for their own sales. Woolworths is a fraction of ShopRite in South Africa. So you can imagine how much ShopRite procures. There's Massmart, we had a Massmart yesterday, there's Spar, there's all of them. So there is a channel of, there is a source of production, but it's concentrated to white commercial farmers. All government needs to do, colleagues, is to engage with the private sector. Luckily, we have a better, firmer relationship with the private sector now than before. Is to go and call the 4 or 5 big retailers, have a meeting that says, look, your empowerment requirements, instead of you giving Andle a BE deal, your empowerment requirements is that you must put together a fund. Each one of you, based on the size, on the market cap, whatever metrics you could use to proportionalize the calculation of their contribution, must put maybe to a north of R1 billion. Easy. Those companies can put R1 billion, and ShopRite has 3 billion rands in their bank account today. They can easily put together R1 billion rands. And as government, you match that R1 billion to a 2 billion rands. And what you then say to ShopRite and Pick n Pay, you say, look, out of your items that you procure from Chile, from Argentina, from Russia, potatoes, you will now, because the white commercial farmers, let's maybe give the context. In 1994, there were 331,000 farmers in South Africa that were producing food for export market and the domestic market. Today, there is 25,000 farmers who are organized formally than the individual self-sufficient farming in the rural towns. So it means that there is vast tracts of land that are not used, that are sitting, some are in between the commercial farms that you have, because people are now planting that, they are cutting their cloth according to their size. They are no longer planting more than what they used to for many reasons, the economy, the cost of capital and other things. Now, if you then get the commercial farmers who are already having the experience of the mechanized new farming ways, you then ask them to be project managers together with other well-experienced black farmers that we have, which are not many. You put them together, you run a program that will plant. You almost expropriate the land, the rural land. You expropriate you even expropriate the commercial land, but you don't dispose the current rights that are there. You just tell a guy that if you're not planting this piece, we're taking, we're gonna plant it. You make them, and in partnership with the retailers who are off-takers, to plant every available tested fertile land in the rural towns. And once you do that, you already guarantee that first grade goes to Woolworths, B grade, Pick and Pay, whatever the story is. Third grade and fourth grade goes to prisons and whatever. But each and every person in the villages who is somehow linked to these projects, those that are in the social grant system, you take them out of social grant system. Those that have kids that are in the social grant system, now that they are earning 4,000, 5,000 a month, you take them out of the social grant system. You take that social grant money, you reorganize it to somewhere else. So we need to think about practical things that can be done. Similarly, so you build the primary agricultural sector. Parallel to that, you build abattoirs, you build agri-processing plants, you build, so you could easily, because the rural dwellers already have enough land that is conducive enough to what Busi is talking about when it comes to human settlement. And once you bring 10,000, 15,000 average salaries into their pockets, then you would have literally cut 10% of that GD coefficient that makes us to be so much far apart, because an average South African at the moment who earns a salary, 45% of them earns 7,500 a month. Only 1 million plus people are in the bracket of 10,000 and above out of the whole 57 million South Africans. So if you then put the practical things that can change tomorrow, because we can't always think about these things now indefinitely. It has to be done as a discussion by June. September is in implementation. Let me close, colleagues, by saying there's a role. Let me come to the stimulus package that the finance minister has put in place. I just want to draw something for you there. The Reserve Bank gave what we call a leeway, the weighted average computation that they do, where the banks are supposed to keep a certain amount of security for the debts, for the loans that they issue, different types of loans, unsecured, secured. It used to be for the liquidity purposes and for the guarantees that the Reserve Bank wanted. Now it used to be 100%, they've lowered it to 80%. What that has done, it has given the banks a leeway to borrow about 540 billion rands to the market, which is the businesses that are coming up. Now, government then says 200 billion of that, because government says we are issuing a 500 billion stimulus, but they say 200 billion of that would be seconded to the banks as a form of guarantee. So it means the government itself is not going to distribute cash. It's not going to go to the banks and deposit 200 billion for them to loan out. The banks will use that 500 billion, 200, that 540 billion, 200 billion of it will be given to businesses. Now, let me give you the picture. We know that the banks don't borrow black people money. They only borrow them for unsecured lending. When you want to go to a funeral and they charge you 25% interest, they borrow you for a house, they charge you 15% interest. We know the story of F&B. They borrow you for your car. We know black people like buying expensive cars that are more expensive than their houses. All of that in this context. But they would never give you the money to build a business. They are very, so if now we have the banks that are being relied upon to distribute the money to the businesses, to black businesses, or to any other business. And by the way, then the limit gets taken to 300 million turnover. And I know that it's probably less than 6% of all black businesses that are turning over more than 300 million. So the plethora of us, we are within that bracket. But if we were to take Nedbank, ABSA, Standard Bank, and ask them, show us your loan books. Show us who are the black people that you have borrowed money since the last 5 years. The unfortunate thing that's going to happen there is that the banks don't ask for B certificate when they borrow people money. So all the banks are going to do is that they have loans to their own white established businesses, the guys that have garage franchises, the guys that have steers, the guys that have all sorts of businesses that are turning over less than 300 million. Most of them are white, and the loan books of the banks are white. So all what the banks are going to do is to prioritize their own clients who are likely not to pay them their money back if they don't come back to life. Now, in closing, let me give you the scenario. The government doesn't capitalize NEF, doesn't capitalize ITC, doesn't capitalize CFA. And all three of those institutions have already gone and given some loan payment holidays, which, by the way, don't capitalize interest. But what they do is that if you owe ITC 10 million rands, you are going to be given a payment holiday not to pay your, let's say, 1 million rands installment. Okay, let's say 100,000 installment. But the reality is that even if you are given the payment holidays, at the moment your business is closed, and you are not even having working capital. So when the economy will get to level 1 and the economy is open, you would be asked, okay, we have given you the payment holidays. You haven't been paying anything, but you don't have money for working capital to do something, to start earning and creating your business to make money. Now, what the banks on the other side are going to do, they're going to take the government 200 billion rands, give payment holidays on their own existing debt and capitalize it, and then they're going to bet because they've got systems. They know the best performing businesses. They know the businesses that have a chance to come back to life. Then they're going to use the government 200 billion as a form of working capital debt to these companies. And they will borrow companies that owes them much more money, where it's going to be a pain for government not to receive, for the bank not to receive the debt payment back. Now, after that is that then the government loan becomes a subservient loan to the main primary loan that the business already had. So white businesses that are currently owing banks money, they will be given the state money to survive on a working capital basis, and they will pay back the original loans of the banks. And then the government money, if they don't pay it, then the banks will walk to the treasurer and say, this data didn't pay back, we are coming to claim the guarantee. So we have to be meticulous to say, it's all well and good that we have the intervention that the Minister of Finance announced, but there must be a binding criteria, like the Minister of Tourism has done, and small businesses. There must be a binding criteria, not just to say a limit of 200 million. There must be a binding criteria to reorganize the ownership of those businesses, to say you must now even find a black partner if you want to access this money, because in any case, you are not transformed. Now, government or failure, which then government must take the 200 billion rands cash and give it to IDC, NEF, and CIFA to distribute the money to black people, because the loan books of CIFA, IDC, and NEF has a B requirement for you to receive the money there. The banks don't ask for a B certificate when they are loaning you. So if we are not meticulous on these things, then we're not going to have post-COVID a reorganized economy. Now, if you were to then distribute the money via IDC and NEF and CIFA, then you would have the so-called rural business people there who are tied up with top-of-the-range off-take agreements to then distribute and supply Woolworths and stuff. Then they would have access to capital. The economy, the definition I had in the beginning is that economy is the reorganizing of the money, but there is no money in the rural economy. There's no money in the villages besides the social grant money. There's no money for one to build a 10 million abattoir there. There is no money, so there's nothing you are organizing. Lastly, as in last point, I have a friend who in Mamasburg, in Cape Town, who in 1999 had 3 Jersey cows, and he had a deal. He had a deal with one of the biggest retailers. Let me not be too prescriptive. The deal said, the milk you produce, we will take it. He had 3 cows, Jersey cows. The guy today is milking 4,000 cows, and the milk is still taken, all of it. So if you were to go to the villagers and say to them, produce potatoes, whatever potato you have, I'm gonna take it. Many of them, the economy will reorganize themselves. You will have conglomerates of potato producers in the villages, because as long as you tie up the effort with the reward, people would work. There's no such a thing as black are poor and are lazy and whatever. If you produce millies like my grandmother used to in her garden, and you don't know what you're gonna do with it, what's the point? And you don't know the rent value of it, what's the point? So if we were to create a market in the village, we will have top-notch production, high quality, high standard food. So that's what I'm talking about. We have to be clever with our government in trying to deal with these so-called stimulus packages, working with the banks, because banks have capacity to have a distribution channel that is quicker and faster than IDC and NEF. But you can't give them an avalanche to do as they please, because all they're going to do is to reorganize the money for their own businesses. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. You have given a detailed presentation that is focused mainly on an economy side of view. And then let me firstly start with Sis Busi, her presentation. She gave a detailed presentation highlighting the socio-economic challenges that we are facing there, emphasizing mostly on inequality and also reflecting on the challenges, the initiatives or the government failures that since the advent of democracy. And then I can agree with you that we haven't made a progress as a new country or as a democratic state. But however, our failures or the government's failures has been mainly on the implementation of the policies that we have formulated, the implementation thereof. That's where the challenge has been. And then looking into the comments again, there are some common views that we have great policies, and then but the challenge remains implementations. And then also, President, you highlighted mainly on using or leveraging on the human capital that we have in the economy in rural areas, and then that by indicating that we cannot really say that we are black people are lazy or so forth, because we have survived before, and then black people continue to survive even in rural communities, and then that indeed I will also agree that agriculture has always been the core economy of the rural economy. But however, since the past, since the advent of democracy, as I also have the privilege of growing up in the rural community, I grew up in a society where my grandfather was a commercial farmer, but now you see that the next generation, we have failed to take on the legacy. So, and then I think the challenge, and then it goes across in many rural communities. I will first start with the question has been coming through, and then I will start with the first question, and then I will ask our speakers just to take any question. The first one from Deep Sea, she says, I would like to know the position of BMF in mining sectors. I think this question emanates from that. If you look into Northwest, it's a rural province, but also has a lot of mining houses, mining companies around it, and then mining contributes a significant portion to the GDP of the country. So she says she wants to know the position of EMF in mining sector, where most white companies are given opportunities to do essential services given the current COVID-19 situation, but black businesses are being sidelined. That is the first question. And then the second question that I saw from Mr. T is Isaac T, where he shared that it's well-known fact that South Africa economy is having structural challenges. Furthermore, the country's economy has a serious productivity challenges coming from a labor market. Therefore, my question, well, what will happen to the current labor market post-COVID-19, given the fact that we are an economy that is being built on consumption and not industrial economy? And then I think the key points of this question is that what is the role of BMF in advising the government to refocus its economic focus and redirect the economy towards much talk about a new economy? Yes, I will request our speaker to have a say on those questions, and then so you can also, if you wish to reflect on the presentation by the president, you are also welcome to do so. And then just before that, if you wishes to make a comment, you can press a request to speak, and then we will allow you to join and to make a remarks from this side. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Busi. Ms. Busi, are you still there?
Oh, yes, I was disconnected for a while. Apologies. Okay. Sorry. What was the question? Oh, you asked me to answer the question. I didn't hear the question. I had the first question around the position of BMF on the mining economy. And I think that is for the president. And I had Mr. Tsie's question around the structural challenge which is affecting South Africa. And what was the last question, MC?
The last question was the role of BMF in advising government to refocus its economic focus and redirect the economy towards much talked about a new economy.
Okay, and I think, look, the president of the BMF, I think, is best placed to answer both those questions. And I think he has given very practical examples in terms of what it is that need to be done to prepare for a transformed rural economy post-COVID-19. You know, and I think I like the practicality of his examples, because in his examples, he actually starts to deal with this economic system that we have in this country of white wealth and black poverty. So I think if we are not deliberate, and allow me to answer this in generic terms, you know, the president will hone in the positions of BMF and what the BMF's views are. I think if we are not deliberate, first and foremost, to change the structure of this economy. And what I'm talking about the fact that this economy is still mainly characterized by oligopolies. And you only have 4 or 5 dominant players in each industry or in each sector. We are not going to achieve what we want to achieve if we are not deliberate about easing the regulation. Because the reason why SMMEs struggle in this country, you know, if you compare us to most economies, most developed economies, you will see that they've got a strong and thriving SMME sector. You will see that the engine of growth in a lot of economies is SMMEs. So if we are serious, therefore, to start being a developmental country or developmental economy, then we're actually going to have to mimic what those developed economies are doing. And unfortunately, this is where, for me, government is failing, and this is where, you know, our policies are failing us. And the reason why I'm putting this on the shoulders of government, it's because, you know, governments are there for a reason. Governments are there to provide direction, and the president is talking to it. He's saying these are the things that government is going to have to start being deliberate about doing for us to start to seeing some of the shifts and the changes that we actually want to see in this country. Otherwise, if government is not deliberate about intervening, then, as the president says, the 200 billion that is given to the banks, it's going to continue servicing those that it has always serviced for the past 350 years in this country. And therefore, you end up not, you know, seeing the effects of this 500 billion stimulus package that has actually been unleashed into our economy. So there's going to have to be a deliberateness from a policy perspective. You know, let's agree that through policies, or rather, policies are a deliberate system of principles that allow us to guide some of our decisions so that we can achieve certain rational outcomes. So let's agree that what we're sitting with in this country is not rational. You can't have 80% of the population, which is Black Africans, which actually only own about 5% of the wealth in this country, because that is what the structure of the economy is. That is not rational, and I don't care, you know, which way you choose to look at it. You can't have 18 million people dependent on some form of social grant or the other, and only 7 million of us who earn enough to pay UN. That is just a recipe for disaster. You are never going to be able to achieve a transformed economy, and you are never going to be able to achieve socio-economic justice, you know, if you don't start dealing with those fundamental structural flaws. So if government is therefore not clear about the policies that we have in this country, and I've spoken about, you know, dealing with the oligopoly structure, ensuring that we ease regulation, because this laborious regulation that you have in this country is actually a gatekeeping mechanism for our SMMEs. A lot of SMMEs will tell you that their biggest pain is not so much access to finance, but access to markets. So government is therefore going to have to be deliberate, as the president, I think, spoke about, to say that how do we therefore force white business and big business to actually integrate, or to actually, you know, go into bed with small Black businesses, because then otherwise you are not giving these small Black businesses and SMMEs a chance to grow. You know, if you continue dealing with them separately outside of the main economy, as it were. There's going to have to be a deliberate way through policy to actually, force them into the economy, force them into big business, and force them into the mainstream economy, as it were. We therefore, through such things, you therefore start dealing with, how do you ensure that you actually foster competition? Because you don't have a very competitive economy, at the moment, because of the oligopoly structure and because of the regulation that is actually meant to stop, SMMEs from actually coming through. So to deal with the current labor market and to deal with trying to create jobs and to preserve jobs, let's agree that SMMEs are the solution. Let's agree that the growth that is required in this country to change the economic trajectory will only achieve that if we're deliberate about bringing SMMEs and black SMMEs in particular, black SMMEs, into the mainstream economy. So there's going to have to be a robustness and some assertiveness that we're actually going to have to implement, in terms of ensuring that we put policies in place that are actually going to ensure that we achieve the transformation that we actually want to achieve. Without that deliberateness and without that intentionality, then unfortunately, we are not going to start changing the structural flaws and challenges that we actually have, in this country. So I think for me, the answer is in the policies. The answer is, how do we start to deliberately and intentionally, change things to be able to foster a particular outcome? Because I once again probably maybe say that let's define what our problem statement, what is it that we're trying to solve for in this country? We may have failed to do that in 1994, but in 2020, given this double blow that we're facing of being a junk status country and of COVID-19, can we go back to the drawing board and just redefine our problem statement again? Because in redefining the problem statement, you can therefore put in place the interventions and the policies that are going to ensure that you actually achieve what you actually need to achieve. And if you ask me, the biggest problem statement that we need to be solving for is that of inequality. Inequality, if we don't deal with the inequality in this country, unfortunately, we're going to be sitting with an Arab Spring, because people are sick and tired of, the socio-economic justice, that they've not achieved. They are sick and tired of the transformation dividends that are actually not flowing to the majority of the citizens of this country. And unfortunately, we are running out of excuses of why we are failing as leaders in this country to implement it. And again, government is running out of excuses of why they're actually not doing it. I'm not going to include business. Business, we know, in the main, they're actually in it, for their own selfish purposes. But business is going to have to be made to toe the line through policies. Business can't be left to run amok and to do as they please in this country. Because therefore, you sit in exactly the situation that we are sitting in this country, where you have 10% of the population that are owning 95% of the wealth, and then the 90% of us, who actually share in the scraps of the 5% of the wealth, and, many much more who actually don't have any measurable wealth at all. So I think it is through policies that we're actually going to be able to deal with the fundamental problems and with the structural challenges that we have in this country. Thanks, MC.
Thank you, Sizuze. Yes, the President, your take.
Look, you see what Busi just said now. It is absolute imperative and use the COVID-19 reset button to dismantle the structural composition of our economy. If you don't, if you have Uronda, it's a hut in the villages, where there's the pole inside that is standing. No matter how dilapidated that heart can be, if that pole is not tampered with, that heart will not fall. So we have, by the way, the monopoly and oligopolies that the apartheid inherited economy had was a deliberate government intervention of the apartheid times, purely because at the time our economy was sanctioned. So they had to build businesses of scale that can have a competitive edge in terms of the taking advantage of the size to influence price, to influence cost, to influence the concentration of some of the development, the skills development of white Afrikaners. They were building institutions, not businesses, that would dominate in every sphere of what they think the economy is important at, starting from dominated, concentrated universities. 4 of them, UP, Stellenbosch, and Potchefstroom, exclusively white Afrikaner businesses. There was an old mutual that existed from the British. The Afrikaners created a Sanlam. They concentrated there. So when they did their own empowerment, Afrikaners versus bother themselves with the BE and tell the whites, the Afrikaner, the English to give stake to white Afrikaner businesses. All they did, they forced the English to take the graduates into their programs of incubation and what's this, internship. 3 years later, they are taken out of there. So they used that, and they used state businesses, IDC, Sasol, Land Bank, PIC, all these big Transnet, Eskom, Telkom, SAA, they created state-owned enterprises. That's why in the apartheid times, those state-owned enterprises, before Jacob Zuma looted them empty, were called developmental institutions. They are no longer developmental almost now. There's nothing of black people that comes out of there. We don't take thousands of graduates to Transnet a year. So white Afrikaners is a model, colleagues, that we need to go and study and apply it now to the advancement of black people. Because Busi is correct. You don't have to have a multinational Sanlam. By the way, the biggest business of Sanlam, which is SPF, has one of the prized clients is South African Defence Force, South African Police Service. All the government employs about 2.69 million employees a year. It's bloated and whatever, but Sanlam thrives from that business. Now, why is it that you don't give regional licenses and you tell the teachers of Eastern Cape to do business with 3 Eastern Cape insurers that are regulated, have the Sanlam? And by the way, if you want to disintegrate the economy whilst you don't alienate the big business, you ask them to take that trillion, that 4 trillion rand that they are holding, it's sitting on their bank balances now, and it's actually earning less interest now because we have had 200 basis points downgrade or 200 basis point reduction on the interest rates. Now that money is not earning them anything. Why don't you then ask them to say, you set up, we give you 25% equity so that they can retain the sources of income. In the past, you had an Anglo-American that owned SAB, owned farmers, they had concentrated businesses. the bigger player feeds the smaller players to stand. And each one of them, once it has its own 2 feet, we spun it out. It gets listed alone. Now, if you go to Australia and Germany, you have an economy that is dominated by entirely, by the way, there are very few big conglomerates in Germany. If you have a BMW in Germany, right, which is a big multinational company, BMW feeds 12,000 SMMEs in their value chain. And they feed them, like in German, your colleagues, don't think when I would talk SMMEs, here in South Africa, an SMME owner is a guy that can't even pay 29 rands a time. In Germany, to be an SMME, you are 100 million euro turnover a year. 100 million euros is about 2 billion rands in South African rands. 2 billion rands. So there you are an SMME. So we're not saying ShopRite must disappear. ShopRite already built shelves around the country. They have the shelves. So they are a good window shopping business, because ShopRite doesn't do anything, by the way. It's a business where you come to them and you tell them, I have bins that I want to sell. They would say, okay, bring those bins. How many do you think people would like them? Yes, bring them. We'll put them on our shelves. And they put them on their shelves and they will tell you, okay, you bring them with your own trucks, you pack, we'll provide people to pack it for you, and we'll pay you this price. By the way, we're not going to pay you when you bring these bins here. We pay you 90 days after the bin has passed the tills. So if your bin stays at ShopRite shelves for 2 months, somebody after 2 months comes and buys this bin, then you will get your money 3 months later after it has been bought. That's why when you hear people say, hey, I remember the lady Garabo, I don't know, Connie Ferguson, she had a cosmetic business with ShopRite. First of all, once ShopRite says to you, we like your bins, once they notice that their clients likes their bins, now you're no longer gonna tell them that you can only produce 100, because they don't want to sell Aiko in their shops. They can't have one item in one shop and don't have it in the other 1,000 shops that they have around the country. So you firstly, once you are listed there, you have to have capacity to produce and put on the shelf. 2, you must have the patience, which is the ability, the capital arsenal to withstand the 5 months payment period. Woolworths does it differently. But what we are talking about, I'm going to answer the 2 BMF specific questions. But what we are talking about, me and Busi here, is that it's inevitable, colleagues. That's why now I'm not worried, Busi, if I want to be very honest with you. I'm not worried about white domination, because it can last as long as it can. It's gonna fall, right? They can buy time. Private sector has been so disingenuous in the democratic era. I match private sector and the corruption of Jacob Zuma as 2 sides of the same coin, because the private sector didn't. If we had a private sector that was at least 50% transformed today, believe me not, we would have had added another 10 million black South Africans into the middle class strata. But private sector had on indefinitely from transforming. So they are as criminal and corrupt in their ways if they are buying into the agenda as Jacob Zuma was. You can match the 2, by the way. They are the same sides. They are the 2 sides of the same coin. Now, we are now given an opportunity, a nice speech the other day. He says we have to reimagine our economy. And we are here. And luckily, we do sit, BMF is part of the BBC, we do sit in these important meetings. We do air. We are busy now as the BBC and BMF putting together an economic strategy. Obviously, we have been running around finding economy with the chairman of the Motsepe Foundation, Mr. Petrus Motsepe. He has already seconded some resources that we can use to inform. We have to not miss this period of, and the suggestion that you hear out there, we can't cry foul, colleagues. It's not anybody's fault, by the way. We are not lobbying the president with documents, not this thing of that he's doing and sitting on and criticizing everything, and there are someone complaining. We have to write economic policies. We have to practicalize. Those of us that are in business, we must define, like I just packaged the 200 billion in real terms. Because you might think that government is doing this deliberate. No, they are not doing it deliberate. It might be a clear blind spot from them, and or it might be the fact that they have been lobbied to use this platform. And it's fair to use the banks because they are efficient, they are quicker, but their credit criteria must be different from the credit criteria that they apply on their normal course of business. Because DACIs have gas loans. So if you are a director of company, colleagues, let me tell you, if you borrow money under the PLTD, the bank requirement says, well, we can see this business of yours does well, but we also need you as the director to see how are you, your finances. And you might find that the business is doing well because you just got a nice purchase order and you serviced it. But you personally, you are still owing the runs that you owe the adversity of gas. Now somebody will say, but why are you not paying it? But you just survived. You have been out of business for the last 3 years. You just bought a deal 6 months ago. You owe DSTV. DSTV that you didn't pay shows the negative credit record. Now, if the bank sees that your business is good, but you, the owner of the business, is not good, it's not going to give you the money because they suspect that once they give you this money, it means you can't handle yourself and affairs. You might not take this money for business purposes. You might take it to yourself personally and start paying this debt, and you end up not investing in the business for the bank to recover its money. So the government of ours, we must tell them that you have to change this thing. Now, BMF is seized with these discussions, colleagues. We are not in the periphery at all. We have a very consultative president, which is the best possible thing you could have. I must commend President Cyril. And more importantly, do you know what I like about the gentleman the most is that when he feels the pressure, because another thing is that we always complain on Twitter and far away from things, but if you put him in the pan, he does buckle and listen. You saw the row about the one company at Treasurer that is given. I mean, an imperial, if you go look imperial, you know what I'm talking about. Imperial, yeah, gets to do these things, all of them. Then the Northwest issue as the last point. Look, when we talk about rural economy, we might be now, because the topic focuses us on the agriculture, but the reorganizing, the fundamentals, the principle is the same, colleagues, is the same. You don't want to wish away. Believe me when I'm saying, by the way, you could have 9 regional banks. Each province has a bank. But you have Standard Bank owning 30% of that bank, because they have to bring in capital. Colleagues forget about being in business without money. Just forget. You see this thing of us, black people, you call yourself, you are in business, you run a company that is like your salary. It makes 20,000 this month, you chow it all, you go and hustle another deal, it makes 10,000 next month, you chow it. That's not business. Let's just agree, that's not business. You are, I don't know what to call you, but that's not the businesses we want to be in business with is the ones that you get to via a policy, as Busi was saying, via a policy that says banks forget about giving X people equity stakes, nominal equity stakes, because I'm a president of BMF now, I sit with the CEO of ABSA, therefore I get an equity stake. Just tell the banks that on each and every rand you borrow, 60 cents of that must go to a 51+% black-owned business, 30% women-owned business. Then you will see a reorganization. So if the banks, if you put that policy, then you make the bank, if the bank wants to borrow a white guy money, they would be forced, but in partnership, when they issue the rand, 40 cents goes to the white guy, 60 they are forced, even if they were not going to do the loan, they are now forced that each and every white loan that is applying is forced that the banks must go and look for other darkies that have put applications there and try to clean them and make them qualify. Because for a white guy to have the 40 cents, there must be a black guy that has 60 cents. By the way, you can even do it the other way around if you want. But you must have a system that demands a policy, a regulation, as Busi has been saying. Busi is not wrong in closing when he says, look, colleagues, government is a referee. There are two critical spheres of an economy. Is the consumption side, is the production side, and is government. And all government does, colleagues, is to manage exploitation relationship between the production and the consumption side. It has been established that we dominate two of these spheres. We dominate the consumption sector or sphere, and we dominate the government sphere. So these whites that have businesses can't have businesses without us, to be quite honest. That's why even they participated in us ending democracy, because they wanted the market. We are the market. So all we need is our government managing the relationship between us as consumers and them as producers for an equitable arrangement. That's all we want. Yes. That's all governments around the world are there for. That's their existence. So one who wants to argue that we negotiated a bad deal in 1994 is talking rubbish in the context that we had to have, what matters the most is the government. So those people that were negotiating there, their key point in mind was that get the referee. In a soccer match, you must have the referee. That's why big business fix games. Once you have the referee, you can then play the rules. You can overlook the oversight. You can let a player call for a penalty. You can issue a red card to advantage your team to win the game. So there's no such a thing that economic power, political power without economic power is nothing. No, political power is the precursor to economic power, not the other way around. There is no big brother that is economic power. If tomorrow we were to agree with whites to, okay, have a government, give us all the businesses. Those guys, it will take them 5 years to regulate us out of business and have both. Now they say no, but we've agreed, we've settled. There's no stories now. Don't tell us rubbish, because you wanted money, we gave you money. a piece of legislation, a piece of paper is equal to R1 billion. If you know that the piece of paper, when you are holding the piece of paper, you are the decision maker. You can tell Churo that, look, there's not going to be private schools in this country. Therefore, we are taking your schools. We will pay you X amount. Your market cap is 4 billion. Thank you. Here's 4 billion. All your schools are ours. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, President.
So the control of government is critical, is the life and omega of our economic prosperity. Now, if this government, by the way, that's why I said earlier, I'm not worried. If this government is lenient, is being offered deals, is taking some kickbacks, whatever the stories that were happening, I'm not worried. The time is the telling point. The inevitability of black power, like they thought when we were oppressed 400 years that we will never get political power, it's not a lie. We will get our economy back, and we will have a leadership in this country that will advance the economic prosperity of a black man. Whether today, tomorrow, or the other day, to me, is immaterial. All we have to do today is to work towards that realization. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The time is working against us, but I will quickly go to our audience. I see Classy. Please prepare yourself to speak, my leader. And then also, we acknowledge the question that have come through, and then we will, in closing remarks, request our speakers to speak on them. Quick one, Class. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks, leadership. Classy Hopers, myself, I'm the current national chairperson of Young Professionals. I've got luxury to meet Busi before, as an MD before. But thanks. I want to reflect on one or two things in my edition, and these are my analysis that I've made on regards to education, that just to prepare most of our young ones to be at classes. So what I have found is that we cannot go on unlocking for education unless there are several things and these problems are not yet addressed. Number one, public schools are having more than 80% of the overall learners in one class. We find in one class there are more than 60% in number, while the documents on coronavirus will tell you that there must be 40 of the learners in one class. So while we're trying to do this, it means there must be an additional mobile classes that are hired to be delivered, and they must be equipped as well with all the necessary equipments needed. While doing that as well, it means you're going to have a shortage of teachers. Then you need to return the old teachers that have pensioned. While you return them, the coronavirus will say that the oldest they are, the more risky they are. When they contract coronavirus, it's not easier for them to turn back on their lives. It takes the oldest people the most. So to me, all these measures that are in place, the new teachers are not going to make it if they come into part. They still have to be trained in terms of teaching also. So it is too late now. We've already lost first quarter, 1 quarter of the education system. It is too late to go back now. What the education should do must stop just shrinking and lying about these things and just tell that we cannot make it up until next year. This year, the education, I don't see it passing either at all or so. It's not going to materialize. If it does materialize, therefore that becomes a very, very serious problem that as the nation, I think, will have to face. Because you can't deprive children, number one, their rights to play, their rights to associate. Even if you tell them what to do, they are not going to change their lifestyle that they were used to live before. They will still be playing amongst each other. They will still be closer amongst each other. So the primary education is not going to suffice in this education unless the higher education, because older people are able to be controlled also. That is when you can be able to mitigate the cost. But thanks to us that I want to provide second analysis on President Andile's views and presentations of so in terms of the rural economy. I believe, in my view, President and the entire participants, I believe what we should be doing is to check into an incubation sector that I believe more young people, if they participate into that incubation program that accommodates necessary innovation, which accommodates creativity as a program, and we institute that because we don't have more funding as Black people. When we go to the banks, they are not funding the innovations that we do have, majorly because of collaterals and other related financial issues. So what we need to do is to develop one of its kind of having an incubation that is entrepreneurial program run, which will look into productions, costing, strategic analysis, all generic management at large, of which that incubation will look at. And that incubation must again have a capacity to remain with the students with theory and with practicality. You don't only give them the theory and you think they live. As what I see currently in South Africa, most of entrepreneurial programs is just theory. They teach you, then you leave. All of them. Then they become happy that they trained a person to become an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur journey, it is not something easier. It needs a mentor in between. It means someone to help you hand to hand on how to make this. Once you have covered 1 year or more of a theory, therefore you can extend it to have 1 year or more of practicality while you are remaining within that incubation. Now the incubation has to train you, the incubation has to fund you, the incubation has to give you mentors that are going to be linked towards you achieving your vision. Therefore, once you are able to work on your own as a child, therefore they are able to live and then you practice your businesses. I believe if we can have a simple clarity on progress on entrepreneurship development, and of which these young professionals will be providing into the point of the economy. Last point, when we try to develop rural into the rural economy, what we need to do is to engage the rural chiefs, those who are in traditional authority, because majorly they think when a business person is coming, is saving money and must give them something in between, as I was experienced before into that services. When you arrive, they ask you if you have a 2 million at hand so that they can take it for their own services or so. So what we need, in my view, there has to be a certain team that is from economic development or agencies that funds or so. When an entrepreneur has such presentation, those people are also present into that matter so that they are able. My traditional authorities are just head chefs, people that are made at homes. They don't even necessarily have all the skills in businesses or entrepreneur. Some that don't even have a knowledge about entrepreneurship. So when you come as a young person, they start to think, who are you? Because most of your forefathers or parents were never been exposed to business. Then what are you going to do now with them? So they don't necessarily take the concept of what you are bringing in terms of developing the economy. That is why it's important to bring a certain team that has an economical imperatives and understand how to grow the economy, which are the teams from the IDCs, the teams from economic development or the CDAs of some sort. They have to be present when such presentations are made. The traditional authority, what they have to do is to schedule a meeting and invite those people so that when you come, they are there to assess the economic situation that you have. That is the situation that I was faced with when I wanted to do a center, a business center from the village that I'm coming from. So up until we resolve these barriers from traditional authorities that they have, we are not going to be able to have the businesses that we want. Even if when we want a land to do an agriculture, you start to be questioned many things. And you are questioned by a person who doesn't have a metric mind, but he's just the head man of that services. So we're not going to make it as young people if we believe that rural development, it must be entailed totally into the hands of the heads and the headmen. It's not going to make it. We need people who are having business potential for such. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then let me quickly move to then our next speaker, Mike. Mr. Mike, you can come in quickly, and let's keep it short because time is working against us, and we are working towards closing now. Thanks, Mike. Over to you. You may speak, sir. Mr. Mike, please check if your mic is not muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead.
No, I was saying that I don't necessarily want to speak. I'm just okay with the notes that I've posted.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Okay. No, thanks. I think we can now close. I will request our speakers to give their closing remarks, and then we have seen comments and then questions that were raised, and then we will all agree that we have the challenge. Our economic challenge is more of a structural one, and then until our government or until organization as BMF, who are the social partners as defined, take an active role in advocating for or influencing the implementation, because the policy have already been formulated. Until then, that's only when we can see the maximum participation of Black people in the economy. Sis Busi, and then the President, your closing remarks. You can go ahead, President. If
That,
Can you hear me, Mr. MC?
yes, I can hear you.
Or is the President going
No,
first?
go first, and then President will close.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay.
no.
So I think, okay, all right. No, I think, thank you very much, President, for inviting me to this very insightful discussion. You know, I think you and I are going to have to be very deliberate, you know, about, as we discussed, by the way, when you came into your presidency, about fostering the strong relationship between business, so BLSA in particular, and the BMF, you know, because I think these are the practical interventions, you know, that we actually need to put in place and to propose if we are serious about changing things in the country. Because you see, at some point, a lot of people are going to start casting aspersions on us as leaders today to say that, but you were in power. What did you do? So, you know, at least the least we can do is to actually try, you know, to say, how do we actually force some of these measures? You know, how do we start destabilizing some of this status quo that actually exists? Because then if we don't try, then I think history is going to judge us very harshly. So I think, colleagues, in closing, for me, under this brilliant topic of preparing for a transformed rural economy post-COVID-19, I think let's not be confused. You know, transformation is about redistribution. You can't have transformation without redistribution. So that is where it starts and that is where it stops. And I think we're going to have to be clear about that. And in my thinking is that in terms of trying to implement it, maybe, just maybe, we might need to start about, or we might need to start with the revision of the non-aggression pact that this ANC government, you know, made with the white power, you know, when they took over this country in 1994, which basically said that we are actually going to give you the political power, but in return, don't mess, you know, with our assets, don't mess with our money, and don't mess with our land. Because I think, let's agree that that pact that was reached in 1994 is clearly not working. And I think let's also be clear that this system of having about 43% of the households who are accessing at least some form of social grant is not going to be sustainable. We need to create an economy where people can actually earn their living. We need to create an economy where we can actually give people, you know, a dignity, you know, where we can actually give people control of their own lives. And I think we need to be clear that as leaders today, you know, you can't solve for South Africa's problems and still think that you are going to be loved by everyone. So I think the challenge, and probably maybe the biggest role that a BMF is going to have to play today, as the president is articulating, is actually, you know, of being robust, of actually, you know, starting these uncomfortable conversations, of actually raising these issues that no one would rather speak about. Because then if we don't dare start, then unfortunately, nothing is actually going to change in this country. So I think it was Thabo Mbeki who said that if we don't think for ourselves, then we place our fate in the hands of others. So the challenge for all of us today is that what is it that we're actually going to place on the table? As the president says, what is it that as we prepare for the phase 3 of our country, which is the economic reform agenda, what is it that we as Black people in this country, as the BMF, are actually going to place in front of this government to say that this is the economic reform agenda that needs to be implemented? Because we would know that if you implement this, then you start solving, for the biggest problem that we have in this country of inequality. Then you start solving for the socio-economic justice that we are yet to receive. Then you start solving, for the phase 2 of this democracy, which is justice and inequality. Because let's agree again that what we achieved in 1994 was not justice. It was not equality. It was just democracy. And that was phase 1. What is it, therefore, that we are going to do as this leadership to actually usher in the phase 2 of this democracy, which is justice and equality? And the president has perfectly started to articulate the practical examples that we can actually put on the table in the form of an economic reform agenda to actually start dealing with these things that are holding the majority of the citizens of this country backwards. Thanks, Mr. MC, and thank you, President.
Okay, thank you, Sis Busi. Also, thank you for your time, for joining us this evening. And then, President.
Yeah, thanks, Busi. It's an honor that you managed to spare us almost 2 hours. We really appreciate it. And I think since this year, I thought we were going to meet somewhere outside of the country the other time. We haven't connected quite correct. We need to go back to our own me and you discussions that could actually, because we do work in these circles of BUSA, BBC and stuff, but there is not a coordinated effort. Sometimes I see and I feel that you are on your own when you articulate some of these things. And if we had a symbiotic voice that would you share this sentiment, I hit this side and the life. So post-COVID, even I will ask my office actually to even organize with the board some of the low-hanging fruits that we can start even agitating on. Because if we wait for COVID, certain decisions and certain life would have continued without us. Colleagues, thanks again for those of you that joined us. It's a bit strange, these things of webinars, because you don't see other people. But I saw Mamudiela, and I saw a lot of questions by that on the side. And I want to, maybe in my closing, just to reflect on things on them, which is what we failed to deal with. But I think in the essence, colleagues, let's not complain. The situation we are in. There's no two ways about it. And by the way, if I may say that, if in this economy you create a 10 million Black middle class on top of the one that exists, Discovery's business will double. ABSA will be double. Do you get what I'm saying? So there is no over the other. Private sector and the contract in them is not in their favor, because they are now making us dry as the poor and the consumers. If they had spread the pie, everybody, including them, will benefit. Now, we need not to complain and need to organize, colleagues, and use the structures like BLSA. Fortunately, BLSA now is in the right hands, if you get what I'm saying, since Bonang took over and Busi. We can use the platform to have this conversation with these guys, because these guys, they were always fearful of unknown, that something will happen to them. Nothing is going to happen. When you say there must be non-regional banks, have those regional banks with an equity holding, because somebody has to and guarantee the balance sheets of those banks. So the big mothers, our bank can still incubate those banks. It's not like we're saying we don't want them. We want them, but we want to use their global arsenal and their global scale businesses to incubate and build 100 million. So when we talk SMEs, colleagues, we must talk 100 million rands at least in South Africa. And then that would be an SME, 100 million rand turnover business, not this thing of survivalist that we want. If we ease the fear and the relationship that he has with business, it's in a better footing. Now what's left is the right conversations. At least the people are talking, but they are not talking the real content you want. Now is the time to use the reset button of COVID-19 to have the real conversation. I'm a businessman, I come across a lot of business people. They are willing. We eliminate corruption in our own government and we eliminate complacency in our own selves. Because as the youth, particularly members of BMF, remember, colleagues, being a member of BMF, there's certain criteria. You don't just wake up and become a member of BMF. And that criteria involves the positioning you have in society. Being a professional is literally an exclusive, elusive position you have, because millions of your own cousins, brothers and sisters don't even make it to the university. Now we need, as the so-called middle class, we need to lead the society. We need to use, if you were to be honest, it's whites that had derived democratic dividends because the economy was opened up and they had the initial capital and the first arrival advantage to invest, and therefore they had derived the democratic dividends. Second to that is the scrupulous crooks that have been administering our economy in between, the black elite that sits in the political network, inner circle network, that have used, unfortunately, by the way, not a business acumen advantage. They used the lootering and the handout system that benefited, and they relaxed the regulations, they relaxed the laws to benefit the white elite establishment. So they are that's the second two people. It's the white elite and the black elite that derived democratic dividend. The critical mass of this democracy, because I can tell you, without this democracy, I would probably be sitting somewhere next to some township in Mthatha, still trying to figure out. So we can't deny that on behalf of our mothers, on behalf of our sisters and cousins, as the black middle class, I'm sitting on the web now, sitting in Sentin now, we have benefited, irrespective of which sides, but there is something on our table. Now, if we are conscious enough, because we can't then blame a white person when we ourselves don't do anything about our benefits. We don't try to bring, as Bolan said, lift other people as we rise. If we don't do those things, then we can't then shift blame to other people only. We must take responsibility, we must lead, and we must be part of the solution. We have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have even the economic advantage collectively as consumers to inform our economy. So let's not just be crybabies. We have the opportunity, we have the government that listens, and if it doesn't listen, we must pressure it. If private sector doesn't listen, we must pressure them. There's no love lost. We are all building for a prosperous rainbow that we have dreamed about by our forebears. I thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. You have President as well as Busi, you have said, Malcolm. And indeed, we need to take what we have and leverage from there to try to advance the agenda of socio-economic transformation. with those words, I would like to thank you on behalf of the provincial leadership of Black Management Forum in Northwest and the membership at large for having took your time to join us, Ms. Busi, and then as well as the president. And then our audience that have joined the session as well. I've seen that most of them they have left the session so far, but I also want to appreciate the comments, even if we haven't covered all the questions that were submitted. But you can go as the email have been shared. You can share your comments through the email, and then we'll ensure that we pass it to the relevant people to maybe to make a reflection on that. And then lastly, also these sessions are recorded, and also they will be uploaded on the BMF YouTube channel, of which you can have access to them at a later stage. I think with those words, I would like to thank you.